I'm Jess Canty. I've been a talent manager in Los Angeles for over 10 years, and this is Take Fountain. So today in Take Fountain, we're talking about trends in the industry. Hollywood is a little bit of a strange animal in that there are trends that are current, and it is an industry that doesn't move very quickly because it's so big and so well established. You not only have to pay attention to what the current trends are, but also understand what current trends are actually going to have a long-lasting impact on the business and that the business is going to respond to over time. And this requires a little bit of a tap dance which means you're paying attention to current trends, but also paying attention to how and if they're seeping into the business at large. Because if you're responding to every little thing, it can start to feel like you're playing a game of whack-a-mole, that old game that you would find at like a Dave & Buster's, where you're just sort of chasing something, but you're never really getting anywhere. Now, the number one way we recommend that actors confront this issue is by reading the trades. And we bring this up quite often in our discussions here on the channel, and it is for good reason. Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and to some extent Deadline, and if you're in theater, Backstage, or Broadway World, those are going to be the places you want to go and read regularly. The reason why I recommend that you read them regularly is you're going to start to see patterns over time. And that's really what you're looking for when you're trying to learn how to discern which trends are sort of the moment and you can maybe ignore, and which trends are going to actually have a long-lasting impact on the business. It can seem a little daunting at first. I always recommend that you pick one of the trade magazines to start with. So whether it's Variety or The Hollywood Reporter, I actually recommend that you get a physical subscription if you can afford one, because there is something about holding that magazine in your hands every week and actually reading it in physical form that I think sticks in a way that it just is hard to manage if you are only looking at the online version. The items that go into the print versions are the things that the editors of these publications think are the most important for people to know because they're going to take the time to put them in print. So if you really put in the time and it really is sort of like a practice, right? You find a time of day, just like you would do your workout, where you're going to take 30 minutes and read a couple articles from that week's Variety or that week's Hollywood Reporter. That's really going to give you that basis over time to start understanding who the players are in the industry, how each of the businesses in the industry react differently or the same to different market forces and to these trends. Over time, you're going to start to recognize names, you're going to start to recognize companies, you're going to start to recognize which reporters are sort of reporting on what parts of the industry. You're going to understand what parts of the magazine are most beneficial to you and what you can skip. You know, sometimes there's fluffy articles in there that may be fun to read but aren't necessarily important for you. And so you can kind of skim past those unless you have time. So that really requires engaging with these publications on a weekly basis. The production cycles for a TV show, from the time the idea is purchased to the time it actually makes it to the screen for people to watch, whether it's the big screen or the small screen, is typically a couple years at the fastest. And so that requires anyone that is in the position to greenlight those shows and those films to really be looking into the future and saying, what do audiences want to see 2 years from now? What are they going to be excited about? And so they're actually trying to guess what the trends will be ahead of time. So if you're noticing a pattern in, all of a sudden there's a lot of vampire movies or TV shows out because you're watching those shows, that's probably a trend that is over, quote unquote, in terms of the development cycle, meaning that those shows are now out, maybe they're doing really well. But if you're being reactive to that as an actor and thinking you need to go out and get a headshot with, some vampire teeth, that's where that whack-a-mole thing starts happening. So the reason why we want people to read the trades is because you're going to be paying attention more to what is being greenlit for the future, as opposed to reacting to what is available now for consumers. This business is always reacting to changes in distribution and changes in technology, or advancements in distribution and technology. And so being aware of the things coming down the pike in terms of new cameras or a new way of distributing something in theaters, or a new technology, something like AI, that is going to impact the industry, and how it's impacting the industry from the moment it is germinated, rather than to the point where, you're watching the first AI movie directed by a big director. There's been stories about AI in the trades for the last 3 or 4 years. And so anyone that's even just reacting to that now is sort of catching up, as opposed to having been aware of the trend from the beginning. The things that you're going to see reported on over and over and over again, that's a likely indication that something is sticking and having an impact on the industry, and is then therefore probably going to impact you as an actor in your daily life. A perfect example of one of these quote unquote trends that is now sticking to the industry is self-taping. If you're just now sort of reconciling with that, you're probably behind a bit in terms of getting your self-tape set up and being competitive in a place where that has now become the norm, and has frankly been the norm for a few years. And if you had been following all along as that shift was happening, you could have been building up your self-tape setup slowly. You would have been doing it at a time when casting wasn't necessarily sure exactly what they wanted to see. SAG hadn't weighed in on it yet. And so you would have been able to kind of learn with everyone as they were going. It looks like self-taping isn't going away anytime soon. And so what are those things that you need to have? We've talked about this in another video. We'll link to it at the end of this video. But again, good lighting, clean background, good sound. You don't need anything fancy to get started. But these days, you are competing with a number of actors who've been self-taping for quite some time. And so you do want to make sure that you're doing this in the most professional way possible. I think the days of, having an unmade bed in the background, I don't know that people are as accepting of that as they may have been in the beginning. I think there's ways of inexpensively hiding that and being able to produce a self-tape on a plain background that are really going to make you be in that crowd that is doing this in the most professional way possible. I think another couple things with self-tapes these days that are sort of expected is that your eye lines, how to interact with the camera, or if you're on a Zoom, you're comfortable sort of, bantering with casting like you would have done in the room prior, and you're knowing how to use the camera potentially on your phone or your computer in a Zoom situation, and how that impacts your setup and your background a little bit differently than if you normally tape with a camera on a tripod. I think also having a set of readers on deck and ready to read with you, and knowing which readers are great for you for comedy, great for you for drama. All of those things are things that actors who have been self-taping for the last 5 years have at the ready. And so that sort of, the bar has been raised for the minimum of what needs to happen in a self-tape so that casting really can focus on your performance. And so I bring this up because self-taping is not a trend anymore, and it is something that has fundamentally shifted in the business, and it is here to stay, at least for the time being. And so really getting good at that, investing in that. I've been around long enough to remember the days when actors had to bring physical headshots to their agency or management company to do submissions with, and actors were driving around town for auditions. There was a lot of cost that went into both of those things. So that cost has shifted to the self-tape setup. There's always a little bit of cost, like we talk about here all the time on the channel, the cost of running your acting business, and investing in your self-tapes is definitely something that we recommend and is worth it, because this is a trend that looks like it's not going away. Another thing that we believe is a trend that's here to stay right now as of April 2025, when we're recording this, is that you really need to know who you are, know your brand, for lack of a better word, and stick with it. I love the saying, if you are trying to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one. We really encourage our clients to know who they are, know what kinds of roles they want to go after, what kinds of roles they're best at, communicate that effectively to their reps, and position themselves through their headshots, their reels, all of their social media and marketing materials, so that it's clear to casting and producers and directors what lanes they want to play in. You can look at people like Kristen Wiig. Before she was on SNL, there wasn't an improv stage in LA that she wasn't on a regular basis. Matthew McConaughey certainly had a couple of lanes he was playing in regularly with repeat business until he decided to pivot and change things up well into his career. Sofia Vergara was, on Modern Family for 11 seasons, playing a really particular type of character. And then she was able to pivot. So we really believe in the premise that you want to get good at one or two things, be the very best at it, be the go-to for casting and producers and directors for that kind of role. And then once you're able to make a name for yourself doing that, then you can kind of raise your hand and say, okay, I'm ready to pivot. I'm ready to do something else. So really understanding who you are, what you love as an artist, where you fit in terms of the enormity of storytelling that is happening in film, TV, and theater, and communicating that effectively. Tom Cruise still hasn't done a TV show. Daniel Day-Lewis, I don't believe, has ever done a comedy. So again, these performers who are incredibly successful are also completely comfortable knowing what they do well and leading with that. Another trend that we're seeing in 2025 that we think is going to be sticky, just based on everything we've read and where the industry is going, is really using your social media strategically. Now, we say that with the caveat that not every actor has to be on social media. We don't believe that it is a must. If you are someone who finds social media to be a chore and you don't have fun interacting with it and don't have fun posting, I actually think it's better to completely not participate and kind of live in the mystery of that these days than begrudgingly participate in social media. Because I think at this point, people can kind of feel that. And so I think it's better to either do it because you love it, do it because you see it as an extension of yourself, something that you find fun doing, that you want to make time to do, and curate your taste and share what you love and share your own updates, or back way off and don't participate and wait until you book that big job that is going to put you in a place where maybe you can pay someone to run your social media for you, or you'll have more time to be focused on that, and you'll have an audience that you'll be interacting with. Whatever you are doing with social media, you want to interact with it strategically. So, I heard this great thing where Instagram is kind of your lookbook. It's the place where you can share, obviously, photos and things that inspire you. I think with Instagram Reels, you can also feed in a bit of your personality, as well as sharing other videos that align with your taste, so that anyone that's looking at your social media on Instagram can kind of get to understand who you are from that perspective. TikTok is really a showcase. So if you are a comedian, if you are someone that does sketch, if you are someone that likes to create characters, TikTok can be a really good place for that. And if that doesn't really speak to you, then maybe TikTok is not a place you want to interact with, but maybe Instagram is, because it's a more natural fit for the kinds of things you want to be sharing or curating. I think another thing that's happening these days too is that there is starting to be a difference between sort of the creator economy and the traditional Hollywood storytelling economy. And what I mean by that is, I think for a while, Hollywood was dabbling in seeing if creators could cross over into being actors, and actors were kind of dabbling in, turning into YouTube creators to see if that would help their acting career. Obviously, there are some notable people who created really amazing things in places like YouTube who then have pivoted to successful acting careers in Hollywood. But those are really the exceptions rather than the rule. And that is another thing about trends that can be really dangerous, is that if you're only looking at the exceptions, it's hard to say that that's a trend. There's always going to be someone that is able to do that in a new way at the highest level and get Hollywood's attention and potentially pivot. Now, if that's you, congratulations, that's awesome. But for the majority of people, that's not going to be their path. And so, again, we really recommend knowing who you are, what it is you want to be doing, what turns you on artistically, and sticking in that lane. And I think the lane of the content creator these days is quite different to some extent than the lane of someone who is an actor that is auditioning with casting and going to class and coming up through the ranks in that way. I think there's quite a bit to do if you're just following the path of the traditional acting path. And so adding in content creation on top of that, unless it comes naturally to you, it can kind of split your attention. I think another thing that's we're starting to see some seeds of starting to see potentially becoming a trend that's specifically very important to actors and anyone that's on camera is protecting your digital likeness. So this is something where if you, before watching this video or listening to us as a podcast, if you've never heard of the trades and today you go out and you start to read them, I think you're going to start to see more and more stories about actors who are having run-ins with sort of AI companies or companies that are utilizing their likenesses in ways they haven't approved. SAG has started to weigh in on this. And so really keeping up with understanding all of the changes and rules and regulations and potential laws that are being passed around your digital likeness, I think that's something that's going to be really important in the next 2 to 3 years. And we're going to see a lot of movement on that front. There have been some one-off things. Scarlett Johansson had a kerfuffle with OpenAI, and a couple other performers have had things happen where their likeness was used in a way that they hadn't approved. And so that is something to definitely pay attention to, and for yourself, understand, so that if you are in a position where your likeness is used in a way that you did not approve, you know what resources are available to you in that situation. I want to close with the idea that in this business, the number one trend that has always been true and will never ever go away is that you have to have a long game mindset. This business requires tenacity, it requires persistence, it requires grit. It has always been hard. I was recently reading a book that was written in 1919 by a couple of writers who were writing about how to break into Hollywood in 1919. And it was honestly shocking to me how, with a little bit of update of some terminology, they talked about writing scenarios instead of writing screenplays. But with some of this swapped out terminology, a lot of the book really, truly could have been written today. And so that just goes to show that even though there's all of these micro trends that happen in the business and all of these changes in technology, the fundamental underpinnings of the business have always worked the same way, and probably worked that way in Renaissance theater and Greek theater. There is just something about the relationship between art and commerce when it comes to storytelling that is always fundamentally going to be the same. And so having that long-term mindset, having that consistency, having that resilience, and coming into this collaboratively are fundamental. And if you focus on those things, that is never going to go out of style. This is the most collaborative art form in the world. And that really is paramount, that you have to be approaching this from the perspective of collaboration, whether it's with casting, with writers, with directors, with your friends, with your agents, with your managers. That is what's going to lead to long-term success. You truly, truly have to love this work, whatever you're doing in Hollywood, outside of the accolades, outside of the recognition, outside of the fame. You have to love it for its own sake in order to have a long-term career. And so when those things come, they become an extra bonus as opposed to the goal. Right now, the business is more competitive than it's been in the last few years, and that's another trend that's happening. We were in a period of what everyone was calling peak TV for quite some time. There were more shows being made than had ever been made in the history of television. And so that meant that there were more roles available for actors than there ever had been. And we're shifting back to a more constricted business, one where we're not making as much, but perhaps we're getting more eyeballs on the things that we are making because audiences aren't spread so thin across so much storytelling. And so that does require that you are undeniable in your performances every single time, because there simply is more competition than there may have been when there were more roles available. And so even if it's just one line, bringing your unique artistic vision to the role in an undeniable way, that is a trend that is also always going to be here. And it is the thing that is going to be assuring you the very most success. Thank you for being here today on this episode, and give us a like or hit that subscribe, and we will see you next time on Take Fountain.